Good morning and welcome to the Australian Early Finance Briefing for Wednesday, the 1st of July 2020. Happy new financial year. So, to start on that note, let's look at something that changed 20 years ago. That is the introduction of the goods and services tax in Australia. Now, a number of public commentators have used this anniversary as a sort of occasion to bring up the fact that there hasn't been any major reform to taxes in that last 20 years. Alexander Downer wrote in the AFR last week that expanding the base of the GST would generate sizable revenue for the states to abolish many of their costly job-destroying taxes. So in Australia, states and territories raise about 25 billion a year from payroll taxes, which is levied on businesses for taking on new employees, which obviously seems like quite a regressive type of taxation. Now, those who were around 20 years ago may remember that the Howard government had a lot of trouble getting it passed through the Senate, and he had to do a deal with the Democrats, who were a minor party in Parliament at the time. And some of the concessions they had to make were to remove GST from fresh food, so typically supermarket food, education, so your Scots College tuition fees are tax-free, your hospital treatments are tax-free, your water, electricity, drainage, all that's tax-free, your credit card fees, no tax. It all seems a little bit ridiculous when they're all the growing areas of the economy. We're seeing obviously education, healthcare, financial services. That's not a new trend. They've been becoming a larger and larger part of a modern Western economy. So there's definitely a strong argument there for sort of moving taxation towards where there's taxation growth. The key complication is we've got this complicated state-federal system where you have the federal government administering the GST. However, the states are the ones who spend the GST and who have the existing taxes that the federal government wants to abolish. So it will be a difficult sell. Queensland Liberal National Party Senator Gerard Rennick said, "I think the feds would need to take the lead on this economic reform, but with the GST, why would we take the political heat when the states stand to gain from the extra revenue? You would need the states on board with the GST to help sell it." So Scott Morrison has asked Josh Frydenberg, the federal treasurer, and state treasurers to work together in developing tax reform on a federation-wide basis. Scott Morrison has ruled out changes to the GST, which I personally think is a real lost opportunity, particularly when we're in such an extreme state of flux as a nation. It's a great opportunity, great opening to really get things changing when everything else is changing. Moving on to Australia's main export, natural resources. They're expected to hit an all-time high of $293 billion. The financial year just ended, which was up from $281 billion the prior year. This is according to government forecasts. The main reason for that drive is the strong iron ore prices and stronger volumes and a weaker than expected Australian dollar. As you may know, Vale, the Brazilian, the largest iron ore exporter, has had a number of issues with safety and now coronavirus in Brazil. So, Australia has really stood to benefit from that. They expect mining and energy exports to tumble 10% to $263 billion this new financial year, and then decline further to $255 billion the following year. Interestingly, gold set to overtake metallurgical coal this year as the nation's third biggest commodity earner. It will hit a record $32 billion on high production and obviously high prices. Gold, a safe haven in uncertain times, is set to be a strong performer, with prices surging to an 8-year high and export earnings now on track to set a new record. So refreshing to see one of our major exports that doesn't emit copious amounts of carbon. Okay, moving to China and its place in the global supply chains. We've seen a lot of talk since the coronavirus crisis about, the need to remove China from supply chains, or limit the dependency of global supply chains on China. But interestingly, since the lockdowns have started, the dominance of China in global supply chains has actually increased. So China's early resumption of industrial activity has allowed Chinese exporters to gain market share. In Japan, Chinese goods accounted for 30% of imports in May, and in Europe they made up 24% of imports in April, which were record highs. So The Economist mentions that China has two big advantages as a manufacturing power. First, its industrialized base has unparalleled depth and has only grown more competitive over the years. In 2005, 26% of the value of Chinese exports was actually added away from China. By 2016, that was down to 17%. That's according to the OECD. So in other words, more of the bits and bobs that end up in China are actually made in China. The other main advantage is China's own internal vast market. So The Economist says this is why many American firms want the Trump administration to go only so far in its tussles with China, applying enough pressure to free up space for them, but not so much as to kill their own opportunities in China. So by one measure, global firms look even more wedded to China, despite the trade war. Over the past 18 months, the value of foreign mergers and acquisitions in China reached its highest in a decade, according to Rhodium Group. So an example of just how dominant China actually is. China manufactures approximately 40% of all active pharmaceutical ingredients used worldwide. That's according to Stada Arzneimittel AG, a German producer of generic and over-the-counter drugs. So Germany plans to present a supply chain strategy in the next few months as it aims to reduce the vulnerability of core industries to potential disruptions in trade flows. So the EU's back to their usual tricks with this. Part of the process, they're looking to enforce tighter rules on human rights and environmental protections on incoming goods. So obviously a sort of stealth form of protectionism. But the FT report that evidence suggests that a massive shift back to Europe is unlikely because of the ever-growing importance of China. The Asian superpower already accounts for about 40% of global vehicle deliveries and is the leading supplier for Volkswagen. Just looking at a quote from Italy, production costs in China are 75% lower than Italy. I can't consider cutting them off and reshoring that particular production line. Simply, there's no other way unless the Italian government decides to cut tax and labour costs dramatically. So that's an Italian manufacturer. So we're looking like a even more dominant China going forward unless some major changes are made. Okay, over to the markets now. 17 minutes after New York opened, the S&P's up 32 basis points. And that's your Australian early finance briefing for the 1st of July 2020. Have a great financial year.